Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, today we're starting off within the vicinity of Vuhledar. The Russian military continues to envelop and encircle the lone 72nd Ukrainian Mechanized Brigade, known as the Black Zaporizhians, that are currently essentially surrounded and stuck inside of Vuhledar. And from the information that we have currently, the last way out of Vuhledar has been sealed. There is a possibility that Ukrainian troops, let's go over to this other map over here, so we'll give you a better idea of what's happening. So if we kind of zoom in, we can see that Russian troops have entered the city itself. As a matter of fact, Russian infantry platoons have actually reached the center of the town and are as we speak, engaging Ukrainian infantry in the center of the city. And what we're hearing is that we could see the surrender of the city probably sooner rather than later. But the only way out is due north of the city. Now let's look at this very closely, and we can see how close the Russians are in terms of the northern most flanks of the city. So if you look over here, Russians are operating. If you look over here, this red area, the Russians have seized control of this hill and high ground here as well. And if we look and we measure basically from the west to the east, it's 3 kilometers. Now, and if you measure the actual firing distance, which is probably the most important number to look at, right to the center here, under 2 kilometers. So a main battle tank, an anti-tank guided weapons team has the ability to engage at that distance. So the possibility that the Ukrainians could do a mass movement out of the town is fairly remote. And then I'm just talking about, obviously, main battle tanks and other such systems. The Russians have complete fire control over there, meaning they can pummel the northern sector of Vuhledar with 122, 152 millimeter gunfire, Grad multiple launch rocket systems. They have complete fire control over the northern route out of the town. And let's go back over to here. So again, if this roadway here were to be used by Ukrainian forces as they move north, they would need to then veer right and then veer again to the north. Now they could try to go over some of these fields as well here, but as they go north, you have Russian units here, you have another kilometer to the north, you have more Russian units. Very difficult proposition for the Ukrainians to try and get out of this town. Now, why didn't the Ukrainian government remove the 72nd Brigade from Vuhledar earlier? It could have been done. The Ukrainians could have gotten those guys out of the town, but for some reason the Ukrainian state has chose not to. Now what we're hearing is that Volodymyr Zelensky, who obviously is a civilian, who has never been in the military before, he's an actor who played the president of the Ukraine, right? No military service. But he is connected to the purse strings. He controls the money. And what's keeping this war going is getting individuals paid, whether it's high-ranking military commanders, political leaders, mercenaries, what have you. This war is continuing because Volodymyr Zelensky controls the purse strings. The money is controlled by him. That is how he controls the war. And then that war is then controlled externally by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, non-governmental organizations in the West, and obviously governmental organizations both in the United Kingdom and the ununited States of America. The figurehead Biden administration, and quite possibly in another month or another few months, the figurehead cackling Kamala administration. But again, figurehead, not making policy, but simply articulating policy for the uninformed urbanites here in the United States. Now, I've had the opportunity to recently read, and I would say recently, over the course of the last few months, I've been reading excerpts from reports of Ukrainian soldiers on the battlefield. And I got to tell you, by reading this report, you can clearly see this is a disgruntled army. And this army has even become more disgruntled within the last 90 days. So since the Donbass offensive has really picked up, we have seen the morale of the Ukrainian military really start to plummet. The Ukrainians are having difficulty in rotating troops. The training, or the lack of training within the Ukrainian military, is incredibly poor. The Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian ground forces, are now asking territorial troops to do things that are really designed for very well-trained parachute infantry, for the use of very well-trained ground forces. But unfortunately for the Ukrainians, many of these units have sustained just massive casualties. So the quality that existed at the start of the war in the Ukrainian military, we fast forward to where we're at now, simply does not exist. Yeah, there are some very well-trained units still within the Ukrainian military, some battle-hardened Ukrainian units. But by and large, as they continue to drag people kicking and screaming off the street to be indentured into the Ukrainian military, to join the Ukrainian military, in which many of these folks do not want to join, they fully are aware now that it is in all probability a death sentence for many who do join the Ukrainian military. But again, some of these missions that are now being asked of these Ukrainian forces is what is really driving this low morale. The Ukrainian military, and especially many of these territorial units that are then attached to units like the 72nd Brigade to help augment and reinforce some of these units, have not been trained. They go through some very, very rudimentary training. Many are not even able to pass basic physical requirements before being pressed into service. Look, I've talked about before, many of these Ukrainian soldiers are fathers and grandfathers. We see many Ukrainian soldiers right now who are in their 50s, and the Ukrainians are doing this really strange, and I think part of it has to do with the new generation, the folks that are under 25 years old, 24, 18, 19 years old. They have lived at apogee. They have been a coddled generation that don't make very good warriors. So right now the Ukrainians are snatching older Ukrainian men and grandfathers and then pressing them into service. Now the Ukrainians are saying, well, it's designed to save the generation that is going to reproduce. We want to grab those who have already reproduced and spare the generation that has not reproduced yet. Well, I hate to break the news, but for reasons that have to do with popular culture in the West, that has infiltrated Ukrainian society. Many of these new generation, these 18, 19, 20-year-olds, have no desire to have children. It's the culture that is being bred right now is anti-children. Now, at the same time, usually when a country goes to war, in the past, it has been always the 18, the 19-year-old, the 20-year-old, the 21-year-old that went to war. This war, it's a little bit different. They're experimenting, and that experimenting is unfortunately for the Ukrainians not really working. It's not really working. On top of that, many of these younger Ukrainian males are just simply fleeing Ukraine, because at a certain point they are going to have to press into service the 17-year-old, the 18-year-old, the 19-year-old, the 20-year-old. It's going to happen. Now, what happens next? Now, I've talked about how this is a war of attrition for the Russians. What's going to happen next is it'll most likely manifest itself, and what happens, it'll probably look a lot like what happened with Afghanistan, where you just see the Ukrainian army finally break. And it'll happen very quickly. Very quickly. And then the question will be raised, and when that happens, as the Ukrainian army starts to break, and we're starting to see signs now of that army breaking, again, if we look at the excerpts, if we look at the information, the reports that are coming from interviews with the average Ukrainian frontline soldier, again, things do not look good. You can see that this army is breaking apart. It's losing confidence in its leadership, and it's also asking the question, why? So when an army loses confidence in its leadership, and at the same time is asking itself, why are we fighting? If the end game is going to be defeat, and I have no confidence in Syrskyi, then why am I fighting? If I believe that Syrskyi is sending me to my doom, and the outcome is going to be the same no matter what, why are we fighting? Now we're seeing that. We're seeing that question being asked right now in the Ukrainian military. We're seeing the Ukrainian soldiers show complete lack of confidence in its leadership. That includes brigade commanders, corps commanders, and most importantly, the high command leadership, the chief of the general staff. They're losing them. The Ukrainian high command is losing or has lost the confidence of its frontline battlefield soldiers. And unfortunately for the Ukrainian military, Vuhledar is just one example of what's happening. These envelopment and destroy operations are happening all across the front line as we speak. Again, glide bomb after glide bomb, artillery round after artillery round, envelop. A Ukrainian battalion finds itself with Russians to the north, Russians to the south, and under attack in perpetuity by the Russian Air Force. And that is what is happening. Now, as we continue to look at what is happening again in Kursk, the Kursk incursion, again, another example of a decision-making process that may not have been that of the actual military. this may have been something designed on a map with Volodymyr Zelensky coming up with a strategic plan, having not been in the military. Remember, these 8 to 11 brigades that were involved in the Kursk incursion could have been used to relieve Vuhledar. And the troops in Vuhledar know that. And that's why the Ukrainian military is in the predicament that it is in today. This is what happens when you have incompetent civilian leaders running military operations. Zaluzhny was sacked by Zelensky not because he was an incompetent commander, but because he pushed back on Zelensky. Zaluzhny was smart enough to know that his army was at a breaking point, and he was trying to articulate that to Zelensky. But Zelensky and Zelensky's handlers in the West did not want to hear that. So here we are. Well, as always, thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon as we continue to watch what is happening on the ground. And we will have more very, very soon. As always, have a good day.